talk is devoted to considering structure and process issues in running organizations. If you will recall some lectures preceding this, we looked at the issues of understanding organizations, and we came to the conclusion that there was no ideal model of running an organization. Indeed, most organizations would be running in multiple modes in a lifetime, depending upon the kind of person who was leading it, the kind of environment which existed, and the kind of people who were in the organization. Be that as it may, irrespective, all organizations would have some structure. That structure may be consciously designed or may not be consciously designed, but there cannot be an organization without some kind of a structure. It is very much like the body of a mammal, which cannot stand or move without some bones in the body which are in some relationship to each other. The structure of the body of any mammal, let us talk of a human being, constitutes of the skeleton. That skeleton is a must, around which are muscles, veins, flesh, and the list can go on. But the structure gradually grows and expands from birth till it reaches a stable level by the time the body matures, and then it stops growing. It does not add to its length, which is why beyond a certain point height of a person does not change. The structure is therefore the basic skeletal system of the human body. You draw that analogy to an organization, and the organization also would have a basic structure. The easiest way of understanding structure is to look at its characteristics, and you will find that an organization structure defines how an organization's resources are to be used or grouped, specifies interrelationships between team members, layers of management, authority and its placement, and operations. For instance, departmentalization, setting of procedures, manuals, control systems represent, all these represent different aspects of structures of an organization, and this elaboration will continue. To help you to understand what has been elaborated under 3 heads in this slide, I find it useful to say that just as you can do an X-ray of a human being to get his skeleton of bones in position, so also it is possible for organizations to be X-rayed, in a matter of speaking, so that its structure shows. The ultimate structure of an organization may look like a pyramid. It may look like a pentagon. It may look circular. It can have different shapes, just as it can have different sizes, but it is always possible to identify it. In fact, as I said, even if a structure is not given, it will be there because it would have grown with the organization. What you find on the slide is a threefold elaboration of how you would get the X-ray of the organization. The first defining characteristic would be the structure would define how an organization's resources are to be used or grouped. And if this statement is not clear to you, you go on to the second statement, where you are told that structure specifies interrelationships between team, layers of management, authority and its placement and its operations. In the next topic of the discussion, when we get to the design of organizations, I will be showing to you different design of organization structures, which will perhaps help you to amplify and understand more clearly what is meant by these two observations here. For the present, my attempt is to show to you how to identify structures and how to see them. For instance, departmentalization is a manifestation of the structure. Departmentalization will be further broken down into jobs, which will be further broken down into tasks, and these things are again clarified in the subsequent topic. But how do you recognize a structure? And these three statements help you in ways of recognizing a structure. Procedures define a structure. Manuals, control systems, all these are different aspects of the structure of an organization. This is again a schematic flow of how structure would operate. In any organization, you would have some systems, some method. In any organization, you would have some processes, and in any organization, it would be reflected in procedures and work instructions, and there will be benchmarks. So, from systems you derive the processes, and from processes you derive procedures and work instructions, and from there the standards of operation and functioning is created. I have explained to you in a certain manner what structures are. I think you should recognize that there are traditional structures and there are modern structures. And then I will go on to explain to you what processes have to do with structures. But before we get to that, we must realize that there are traditional structures and there are modern structures. Traditional structures have the following characteristic. They are hierarchical in nature, they lack flexibility to changing mission needs, rapidly changing world, internal and external communications, ideas are not communicated or communicated minimally, slow, poor response in responding to customer requirements, there are turf battles and there is failure to get things done. Customers, vendors have a hard time dealing with the organization because there are multiple known contacts, and it is necessary to recognize that all this is a very conservative expression of what traditional structures can be like. But before you understand what modern structures can be like, you must be clear on what traditional structures can be like. Now, traditional structures by themselves do not represent a value, but they help you to understand the beginning of the discussion. By hierarchical in nature is meant that it is often pyramidal in shape, the command control system is clear, and people go through proper channels to get a job done. They lack flexibility to changing mission, because they tend to take a wooden or a technical way out, and they would not deviate beyond the rules. You can go back to my presentation on understanding organizations and recall what I was trying to tell you when I explained to you the Apollo model or the Greek temple model. But whether it was the Apollo model or the Zeus model, the fact remains that it was rigidity. In the Zeus model, the will of the leader became law. In the Apollo model or the Greek temple model, there was rigidity of rules and regulations. In this talk, I am using the expression traditional to explain what is conventionally the shape of structure, which in operational terms is probably never the case. Be that as it may be, it is important to realize that the defining characteristics of slow, poor, tough battles, failure to get things done have nothing to do with the fact that hierarchical structures may be run in an intelligent or a proactive manner. Opposite of traditional structure would be a flat structure. Flattening the organization basically means reducing levels of an organization in the hope of achieving organizational efficiency and effectiveness, and reducing the boundaries vertical, horizontal, external and geographic. This is often seen with a great deal of virtuosity, which is quite unrealistic. All organizations can't be flat any more that all organizations can't be hierarchical. Again, be that as it may, the purpose here is not to give to you a value rating of different types of structures, but to explain to you how it is necessary to recognize that there are structures, and these structures are a photo representation of the work methods of an organization. Now, any organization will have different levels, different issues to handle, different activities. For example, the activity of a marketing division would be different from an activity of a manufacturing decision. The activity of a manufacturing decision will be very different from the activities of a finance division, and it is not as if the same kind of structure would be in each of the functions. Each function may have a different structure, and those structures may be put together by a linking pin or by a job description which has coordination as its basic description. Again, these issues will become more clear once I elaborate to you the concerns of design of the organization and the concerns of recognition that the actual operational design of a system may be at variance of the technical design of a system. There is always a difference between the grammar or the literature, and there is always a difference between the way something is to be done and the way something is actually done. The slide before you shows the definition of a process, and that is my way of telling you that in real life terms, structure may not at all be operating the way it is defined, but it may be actually following the process flows. Therefore, it brings us to the question, what is a process? Processes are the definitions that enable a team to perform well on the dimensions of speed, cost, quality and innovation. Let me repeat, processes are the definitions that enable a team to perform well on the dimensions of speed, cost, quality and innovation. Processes enable knowledge and experience to spread through the team, whether in business practices, that is finance, order fulfillment, etc., or human interaction practices, that is performance appraisal, problem solving, communication, etc. Now, if that is not clear to you, you need to understand processes as flows. Again, let us get back to the human body. There is the skeleton, which is the relationship of bones which holds the body together, but if it is a live body, around the skeleton system there are blood flows in veins, there are information flows in the nerves, there is a whole sequence of command and compliance between the brain and the limbs. Processes are flows in organization. Processes show how exactly something is done in an organization, and they demonstrate transmission across the organizational system. So, obviously, there has to be a relationship between structure and process. Now, this diagram shows to you how process is a set of interrelated activities and resources which transform inputs into outputs. So, you have the input here, you have the output here, you have the throughput here, and this is the feedback to the input. Link it up with organizations, and what is it that you find? You find a system where the structure may say that you go up to the general manager if you are an assistant manager, via the deputy manager, the manager, the senior manager and the deputy general manager. In other words, you go through different levels to communicate to the general manager if you are in the capacity of an assistant manager in an organization. In operational life, however, this structure need not be followed in all cases. For example, if you are an assistant manager dealing with a public relations issue, it may be so designated that once you are face to face with a problem or a situation, you communicate directly to the general manager, skipping the deputy manager, the senior manager, the deputy general manager. You skip 4 levels in between and you go directly to the general manager. Therefore, processes have an operational significance. processes show that in the ultimate analysis it is task accomplishment which matters. So, again going back to the analogy which I gave you earlier on, if you have the relationship between grammar and literature, grammar tells you how it should be done, literature tells you how it is actually done. For example, there is the case of a padre talking to a person who was an alcoholic according to the padre, and the padre wanted the person to give up his drinking. So, he gave him a pep talk asking him to give up drinking, to which the person who was given to alcohol turned around to the padre and said, "Father, me not drinky drunky, me drinky drinky," meaning thereby I do not drink to get drunk, I drink for the sake of drinking. Now, this statement may be technically all wrong if the grammatical concerns are raised, but no one will deny that it is a powerful statement and conveys the point quite accurately. So, that is what I stated is the difference between grammar and literature. A structure conveys to you the grammar of an organization, much like an X-ray, but the body has different ways of dealing with the externalities, different ways of dealing with the situation, and processes are the operational aspect of it. The process tells you how exactly a hand should be lifted to move a glass. The processes tell you what speed you should walk at. Convert the physical analogy to an organizational system, and you will notice how processes decide how speedily a task is to be accomplished. It is possible for the top man to say, "Do not bother with the signature, get my oral approval, record it and move ahead." What has he done? He has cut across various procedures to expedite the process. He has put aside the structure in the interest of task accomplishment. Hence, I hope what is being conveyed to you is the difference between structure, which defines the relationship between the different constituent parts of the body, and the processes which enable a task to be done. Clearly then, there has to be a relationship between structure and process, and the question remains on how do we look at it. You heard me use just now an expression called procedure, which is yet a third concept in the system. We had structure, we had processes, and now we are talking of procedure. Procedure is a specified way of performing an activity. In a bureaucratic system, and you can go back to my lecture which had to do with Athena or which had to do with Apollo. These were not personality driven systems, but these were systems which were driven by procedure. So, a decision to be correct has to follow the procedure. Procedure is the guarantee of objectivity in decision making. Procedure is the guarantee of the decision process being subjected to scrutiny and coming out successful. Procedure is the method by which you eliminate prejudices or you prevent distortions. Procedures therefore should be understood for their strength, and it is like anything else capable of cutting both ways. Excessive procedures would impede the process. Inadequate procedures would again distort the process. Procedures, like much else in life, have to be balanced, proportionate and in sync with what the system requires. The definition first. Procedure is a specified way of performing an activity. It decides what shall be done and by whom. So, the act is defined and the person is defined. This again, to refer back to one of the elaborations which I have already made with you, defines the role. Therefore, roles are very important to procedures. Presumably, roles go to the people who are qualified skill wise to handle the roles. If, for example, you are deputy manager legal, then it is presumed that you will be familiar with the legal component. If you are on the other hand manager finance, it is assumed that you would be familiar with financial processes and procedures. So, procedure is basically an elaboration of role relationship. Any procedure then defines when it will be done, where it will be done and how it shall be done. These are very important concepts, just as important as what and by whom, defining when a task will be done, defining where it will be done and defining how it will be done is the essence of good management. When here has a meaning of sequence, you can't speak out of turn. You can't take on an activity unless certain precursor activities have been completed. Where means even if you are competent to do a job, if that has not been assigned to you, then in your role in an organization where you must be embedded somewhere, you cannot start doing it unless it has been remitted to you. And how? What are the steps you go through before you take a decision? So, the soundness of a decision is really a factor of when, where and how it shall be done. The fourth qualifying dimension of procedure is what material, equipment, documents shall be used. Now, procedure here, when you are talking of material, need not necessarily be only decision making. It can be a product procedure that will determine the quality, and even for that there is a procedure. So, the question of what material does not really mean whether you use plastic or you use clay or you use alloy. No, material means specifications. Is it fully baked? Is it not fully baked? Baked here meaning is it ready, is it not ready? Again the equipment, because if you don't use the right equipment, there may be losses of the raw material. For example, if you are cutting precious stones and your bow is not sufficiently sophisticated, your implement for chiseling that precious stone is not sufficiently sophisticated, then that precious stone will suffer from wastage and you may be cutting deeper than required or cutting at inadequate angles, which would cause further loss of material when corrected. So, the choice of equipment is also essential to a procedure, and this is a manufacturing dimension. Then there is the question of documents. You may have a decision where legal remembrancing is needed, and if legal remembrancing is inadequate, then you will get a wrong decision. So, procedures are the heart of correctness of an organization. And finally, there is the concern of how it shall be controlled and recorded, because after a process has been completed, the process tends to be seen only in terms of its results. In very few cases are processes actually recorded, and where processes are not actually recorded, you cannot go back to answering what, how, where, when, whom or any other matter. So, the efficacy and the correctness of the control procedure cannot be re-examined and a conclusion reached. Hence, the how has also to be recorded, and how is the process issue. The conclusion which comes from this kind of elaboration is procedures are needed to document the processes followed, and there is no getting away from it. So, three concepts have been shared with you: structure, process, procedures. All three of them are central to the proper running of any organization. Let us look at certain definition of processes. Process is not just a way of working, but is also a state of mind. Now, as you can clearly see, this is a rather rarefied definition of a process. Usually, people confuse process with procedures or a way of working. What it says is process is a state of mind. In other words, we need to keep improving our way of working. We need to know our prejudices. We need to know our predilections. Above all, we need to know our own competencies and know whether we are at all knowledgeable of what we are doing and the consequences which will come out of it. So, processes are a little more than technicality. It is a whole approach which permeates an organization before a decision actually gets taken. A behavior towards maximizing results can also be a process. This can be in terms of quality and volumes. This definition is very largely in the manufacturing domain, where you look at a behavior towards maximizing results, not only in terms of the numbers, but also the quality, the standardization and the specification. The third definition which comes out is that processes are an imperative and we need to move fast in the marketplace, otherwise we can't beat competition. Processes are imperative, which means what? They are, to understand the word imperative, you need to be briefed on the expression an optional extra. That is, you do it when you have to, when you ignore it when you can, but when it comes to processes, there is no choice and you can't ignore it. You have to follow it. Therefore, it is an imperative. Even though we may need to move as fast in the marketplace as we possibly can. In other words, processes are an insurance about the correctness of a decision, not in terms of the ethics alone, which is of course important, but also in terms of effectiveness. And later on in the presentation, we will be having a presentation on concerns of effectiveness and efficiency. It may be easy for you to remember what process stands for if you look at the word process as an acronym. There is a breakup given there in an acronym form of characteristics of an effective process, and PROCESS. Each of these alphabets represent a concept. Let me walk through it and then I will explain it. P in process stands for planned, R stands for repeatable, O stands for having clear objectives, C you take a little liberty with the spelling of simple and spell it with a C and you get CIMPLE. E engineered for optimum performance, S sensitivity to variety, and the second S scope for handling exigencies. Now, if you notice the spelling of process having 7 alphabets has been broken up here in the form of an acronym. And if you remember the concepts it stands for, it will not be difficult for you to recall what is the definition of a process. Process is always planned, process is always repeatable, process always has objectives, processes are usually simple, processes are usually engineered for optimal performance, processes have sensitivity, they know that one size does not fit all, and above all the processes must have a scope for handling exigencies, because everything cannot be predicted. Now, your takeaway from this presentation should be to understand the processes of your organization. It may be an educational institution, it may be a place where you work, it may be an organization with which you have to deal with. But remember what I said in the very first talk, there is no use of walking through a course like understanding organization structure and human resources aspects, etc., which this course deals with, and not be aware of the fact that actually these lessons are life skills reinforcing lessons also. They help you to face life better, they help you to handle life better, they help you to be an more effective individual, and of course, a more effective organization man. One needs to understand therefore, that without processes we would be all working in an ad hoc environment. And I give here again a set of definitions with using ad hoc as an acronym, and again it should be easy for you to remember it. A means accountability is not there. So, if you do not have processes, then you will be in an ad hoc situation. Ad hoc as an acronym means what? Accountability is not there. D, different approaches to the same issue. Now, if you have different approaches to the same issue, you get to different results for the same issue. And if you get to different results for the same issue, then the sustainability becomes problematic. H stands for a solution every time an issue comes up. Therefore, some people call it modeling, and many engineers have the propensity to use the word model just about everywhere. I do not want to enter that debate, but the proposition I want to put before you is hunt for a solution every time an issue comes up can be a corrosive process. If you create a model, then you know when this issue is there, this is the solution which will come up. O stands for operational and not strategic. No useful analysis related to a business can be made if it is not strategic. You can't run business from moment to moment, because if you run business from moment to moment, your predictive validity with your stakeholders reduces. They do not know where you stand, and indeed you may not know whether they will come back with another problem which may need a similar solution or otherwise. So, there is no question of taking operational decisions without some kind of a strategic vision. So, if you are ad hoc, then you are operational and you do not have a strategic decision. And finally, C states commonality of understanding is missing. So, you notice that in each case accountability, approaches, operational or commonality of understanding are elements which go missing. So, once you create an ad hoc situation which is the opposite of a procedural situation, of a process situation, then you end up in a fairly chaotic manner. And if you end up in a fairly chaotic manner, then there is no way in which the organization can go through a process of stress testing, demands on its system, and where you will recognize that it is important. In the interest of evoking confidence amongst your stakeholders that they know what your rules are, what your regulations are, what your processes are, and how you are going to handle it. Indeed, half the game of competitive success in the market today comes out of evoking confidence amongst all your stakeholders, your regulators, so that they instinctively believe that you are operating within the framework of a regulation and you are not going to jump it. They instinctively trust what you say, rather than in each case ask you to produce evidence, ask you to produce documentation, which is such a destroyer of time when it comes to managing business results. Also, in dealing with vendors and customers, if there aren't standard operating procedures, if there aren't processes which are identified, which people deal with and which people have a level of comfort with, then you are not going to grow, but every case is going to be handled on a case to case basis, and that becomes a fairly problematic situation. The long and short of it is that, to sum up, if structures give the grammar of an organization, the processes show how an organization comes alive, then procedures explain how the task is gone about, and the results are usually fulfilling to a business interest, and they help you to establish how exactly one may be able to put together different forms of interests, resources, and indeed create an organization which is capable of responding to fluctuating times, turbulent times, and demands of a variety which earlier on were neither experienced nor known. Structure, processes, procedures, therefore, make an organization come alive, raise its responsive capabilities, make it more self-renewing, and make it possible for an organization to be trusted by all its stakeholders, and therefore get into a business environment with confidence of growth and with confidence of success. We shall be taking up subsequently the relationship between structure, processes, and the implication which it has for the functioning of organizations beyond what has already been discussed.